Are overseas contracts more difficult to get now than they used to be? This is a question that we get quite a lot from people that are trying to get into the industry, and they hear from other people who've done it, like, oh, you know, there's so much less than there used to be. It's so hard to get into the industry now and break in. And so we're going to do a video and cover that today. So are the jobs more difficult to get now than they used to be? The answer to that is a simple yes, mostly. Let's talk about it. There's a few sort of caveats of how the industry has changed in the 11 years since basically I was doing it, and we were in Iraq for probably a couple years before I got in the game, and obviously Afghanistan as well. But I was there relatively early on, like 2007 is when I first went. So yeah, so things have changed. Obviously the game has changed, geopolitics have changed, and so let's talk about the specific places that's changed. First, let's cover the conflict zones, Iraq and Afghanistan. So at one point, this was circa late 2010, I believe, the peak of contractors was at its zenith, and there was somewhere in the realm of 100 to 110,000 contractors just between those two locations. And today, throughout the Middle East and Afghanistan combined, this is all the Middle East, not just Iraq and Afghanistan, there's somewhere around 30 to 35,000, maybe upwards of 40. And so back at one point, if you had a pulse, you could fog a mirror and you were remotely capable at doing something, they would hire you to go to Iraq and Afghanistan. Whereas now, to get your foot in the door without experience, without that overseas experience, it is definitely more difficult, especially for Iraq and Afghanistan. The numbers have just come down, and so those really high-paying conflict zone positions where you can make 120, 130, 150, maybe even $200,000 a year, depending on what your specialty is, those jobs are definitely harder to come by now. And I won't pull any punches or BS anyone about that. I'm not about the BS and the game or whatever. This is the hard fact, is there's simply less of those really top paying jobs over there in the direct conflict zones. So what about the rest of the Middle East? I'm talking about places like Saudi, Qatar, Kuwait, UAE, Oman, Jordan, all these kind of things. One of the things, a recent announcement, and you know, this will end up dating this video, maybe a couple years from now people will be like, oh, this is old crap. But for now, the new announcement is that the president is going to withdraw from Syria. And so one of the concerns that I've gotten emails about and comments even on YouTube is now we're going to pull out of Iraq and Afghanistan. And no, we are not. We are just pulling out of Syria. But in the rest of the Middle East, so all these places where there's not a direct conflict going on, the numbers have stayed steady. In fact, they've actually grown slightly, especially in Saudi Arabia, because they've had a ton of like military sales. And so you need admin support to support all those sales, and contracting support, financial support, as well as the technical support of like training people of how to use this crap and how to maintain it and where to store it. And so Saudi's got a really big increase. Kuwait has stayed really, really stable. So in the rest of the Middle East, it's kind of stayed stable and maybe even grown a little bit. Whereas in the conflict zones, it's kind of shrinking. So that's kind of, right now, that's the recent change, and that's where things are in the Middle East sort of combined. So what does this mean for us? And this is something we cover in the course, and it should not be overlooked. But for us contractors, the big shift is that we are tired of being bogged down. We, as in the American government, the American military, the American people, are tired of being bogged down in the Middle East. Now we know that the new focus is China, and China's really just coming on strong economically, and once they've got the economics, then they can fund the military technologies, and They've got a lot more people than we do as well, but it's the technology and the equipment that's really the big thing when it comes to military might. So what you're seeing is the pivot, the Asian pivot. It's the pivot away from the concerns of the Middle East and pushing into Asia. And so that's where we're seeing the biggest expansion right now in the contracting world, is places like Guam and Korea and Japan and the Marshall Islands, and these Pacific type of locations are seeing big increases. And so don't overlook the APAC region. That whole Asian pivot creates opportunities for us as contractors. Now, it might not pay what working in Iraq is going to pay, but I guarantee you hanging out and living in Japan is definitely a lot better than hanging out and living in Baghdad. So it's a trade-off. Okay, so that's it. I hope we answered the question, because it wasn't a direct, easy yes or no. Now, we try to focus on the Middle East because that's still where you're going to make the most bang for your buck, and you're definitely going to be tax-free in those locations. But be aware that we cover this Asian pivot situation, of course, and it's something to be aware of. Start off in the Middle East, but then take it easy, go over to the APAC region where the new contracts are emerging, and sort of take it easy, man. If you want to, just build up another, it'll be good money, it'll, still be overseas money, and, you can hopefully save a big chunk of that, and it'll also add to your experience. So hopefully that answers the question, and we'll see you next time.